The great hall of the Zalvari Empire was quiet, filled with cold marble and flickering blue flames. Tall, black-armored guards stood along the walls, their spears humming with silent energy. At the center of the hall sat King Drezek, ruler of the Zalvari people, his skin rough and green-gray, his golden crown casting a long shadow across his face. He looked down at the group of humans who had traveled across light years to meet him. At their front stood Commander Jason Rourke, a war-hardened soldier with gray streaks in his short hair and eyes that had seen too much. Rourke didn't bow. He simply stood tall, waiting. To his left stood a girl. Not just any girl, Princess Jeria, the only daughter of the alien king. She looked tired, distant, her silver robes hanging loosely on her thin frame. Her eyes, golden and wide, were blank, as if she had long ago stopped dreaming. King Drezek's voice filled the room, strong but empty. He said he had made a decision. To show goodwill and avoid a war with Earth, he would give Jeria to the humans, not as a warrior, not even as a bride, simply as something to be rid of. She was weak, he said, useless in war. She could not lead, could not fight, and had brought nothing but shame to her name. So he gave her away like a broken blade, hoping to earn peace through pity. The Zalvari Council stayed silent, though some glanced at each other in quiet disbelief. Rourke stepped forward, but not to argue. He looked at the girl beside him. She didn't look up, but he saw something in her, a flicker in her eyes, small and fragile, like a spark buried beneath ashes. He didn't offer pity. He simply nodded and said they would take her. No more words were exchanged. Rourke reached out his hand, and slowly Jeria took it. Her touch was cold, but she followed him without resistance. Outside the throne room, a storm of red clouds swirled across the skies of Zalvar Prime and far. Beyond the planet's orbit, dark news traveled through space. A machine race known as the Scourge was moving again. It was an old enemy one Earth barely survived a century ago. Now it had returned, stronger and hungrier, devouring colonies and burning through defense fleets with cold precision. Rumors spoke of whole planets going dark within minutes. No survivors, no mercy. The Scourge was not just coming for Earth, it was coming for everyone. And yet, in that moment, all Rourke had was a silent alien girl who had never seen a real battle, and a promise from a king who gave her away like she was nothing. Back aboard the human warship Vanguard, Rourke's second-in-command raised his eyebrows when he saw Jeria. "That her?" he asked. Rourke nodded. "We'll train her," he said. "Why?" the officer asked. Rourke didn't answer at first. He just looked back at Jeria, who stood quietly, eyes scanning the unfamiliar steel hulls of the ship. "Because she's not nothing," he finally said. And deep down, he believed it. Somewhere behind the dull stare and the royal robes was something else. She had been given away like trash, but Rourke had seen enough broken things turn into blades. War was coming. The galaxy would soon be covered in fire. And maybe, just maybe, this forgotten princess would rise from the ashes. Jeria stepped onto the Vanguard with silent footsteps, her silver robes trailing behind her like a shadow of her past. The human warship felt strange cold steel walls, buzzing lights, and the hum of engines beneath the floor. Everything was different from the palace halls she once walked. No one bowed to her here. No one cared she was a princess. She was just another body taking up space. Commander Rourke assigned her a small room with a narrow bed and a single drawer. It smelled of oil and metal. The next morning, her training began. Rourke brought her to the ship's combat bay, where soldiers practiced with heavy weapons and fought in zero-gravity chambers. Jeria stood awkwardly at first, unsure what to do. Her arms were thin, unused to lifting weights. Her movements were Slow, too soft for war. The soldiers watched, some with quiet laughs as she tried to copy the exercises and failed. She fell. She slipped. She got bruised. But she didn't stop. Rourke watched from the side, arms crossed, saying nothing. He saw it again, the spark. Weak, but still there. Jeria returned the next day, her arms aching, her pride buried deep. She trained harder, stayed longer, and listened closely. She studied the way humans fought, not with elegance, but with fury and grit. They weren't the strongest in the galaxy, but they adapted faster than anyone. They learned from every fight, and they never gave up. She wanted that. Slowly, something inside her began to change. Her hands, once soft and uncertain, grew calloused. Her legs grew stronger. Her strikes sharper. Rourke gave her real armor light at first, then heavier. He trained her personally, showing her how to move, when to strike, and when to think. He taught her that battle wasn't just power, it was patience, timing, and the will to survive. Jeria listened to every word. Her people had always said she was weak, born without the fire of warriors. But on the vanguard, no one told her what she couldn't be. There were no voices saying she'd fail. Only the sound of her own breath as she pushed through pain. After a few weeks, the soldiers stopped laughing. One by one, they began to nod as she passed, some even asking her for tips. Jeria, once too shy to speak, now showed others how to balance during zero-gravity combat. Her mind, sharp from years of silence, picked up tactics quickly. Rourke watched with quiet pride. She wasn't just learning. She was becoming something new. One night, as the ship drifted near a burning red nebula, Rourke found her alone in the hangar, practicing with twin blades. The weapons glowed faintly. In the dark, cutting the air with smooth arcs. Her movements were fast, precise, not perfect, but close. He stepped forward and she stopped, turning to him. "You fight like a human now," he said. She breathed heavily, sweat on her brow, and nodded. "Because you taught me," she said softly. He looked at her and smiled. "No," he said. "I only showed you the way. You walked it yourself." In the distance, warnings buzzed across the ship. The Scourge had taken 3 more systems. Colonies were gone, no messages. No escape pods, just silence. Fear spread like fire through the fleet. But aboard the Vanguard, something else burned. Brighter. Jeria was no longer the girl handed away like a broken gift. She was a flame, slowly growing. A warrior was being forged, not just by training, but by choice. And she had chosen to fight, not for a throne, not for a title, but for herself, and for the people who gave her a chance. The princess was gone. In her place stood someone new, someone ready. The alarm lights flashed red as the Vanguard dropped out of warp near Helios Gate, a massive space station floating near a dying star. The sky beyond was filled with glowing wreckage, spinning husks of destroyed ships, and the distant shimmer of refugee transports trying to escape. The Scourge had arrived earlier than expected, thousands of AI warships, black and silent, moving through space like a hungry wave. Commander Rourke stood on the bridge, his face tense, watching the enemy fleet close in. They were already firing on the evacuation lines, tearing through unarmed transports. Helios Gate's defense platforms were falling one by one. Earth Command had ordered the Vanguard to hold the line until the civilians could jump to safety. It was suicide, but they had no other choice. Beside Rourke, Jeria stood in full battle armor, her face hard and focused. Her silver eyes reflected the flashing lights of incoming missile warnings. She was no longer the quiet princess who had arrived unsure and lost. She was a fighter now, quick, strong, and unafraid. Rourke gave the order, and the Vanguard surged forward. Human fighters launched from the hangars, darting into the chaos like a swarm of angry bees. Jeria didn't stay behind. She led a boarding team in a drop pod, aimed straight at one of the Scourge's dreadnoughts. The enemy ship was massive, shaped like a black claw, its surface pulsing with blue light. As their pod slammed into the hull, Jeria was the first out, blades drawn, charging through the breach with fury. The Scourge drones came fast, dozens at a time, metallic limbs slicing through the air, red eyes glowing. But Jeria was faster. She moved with deadly grace, cutting through them like a storm. Her team followed her lead, pushing deeper into the ship. Every step was a fight. Every hallway became a grave. Rourke guided them from the bridge, his voice calm through the comms, directing strikes and movements with sharp orders. Above, the Vanguard took heavy fire, shields cracking, engines burning. Still, the ship held its ground, defending the escape. Route for the civilians. On the dreadnought, Jeria reached the main reactor. The Scourge EI core was there, humming with cold logic, sending commands to the fleet outside. She knew what had to be done. With a final cry, she plunged her blades into the core, sparks flying as the lights flickered and the walls shook. The dreadnought began to fall apart. The team raced back to the pod, Jeria helping a wounded soldier limp along. The explosion followed them, fire chasing them into space. The pod barely made it back to the Vanguard, slamming into the docking bay as systems screamed. On the bridge, Rourke watched as one of the Scourge dreadnoughts broke apart, its pieces drifting away like ash. The rest of the Scourge fleet paused just for a second. That second was enough. The civilian transports jumped to safety. The mission was a success. They had held the line. As Jeria stepped out of the pod, covered in smoke and blood, the crew stared at her in silence. Then someone began to clap. Others joined in. She didn't smile, but her eyes burned with something fierce. She had faced death and won. Not as a symbol, not as a princess, but as a warrior. That day, Jeria earned her place not through bloodline, but through battle. The Scourge would come again stronger, smarter. But now they knew something they hadn't before. Humanity had warriors. And one of them was not human at all. Jeria's name spread quickly across the fleet like a spark catching dry grass. Soldiers spoke of her with respect, sometimes even awe the alien princess who fought like a storm, the one who led the charge onto a Scourge dreadnought and came back alive. On board the Vanguard, new recruits looked up to her. She trained with them, taught them how to move, how to fight, how to think like warriors. She was patient but firm, never showing off, never acting like royalty. She taught not as a princess, but as someone who had survived. Her mix of alien strength and human tactics made her more than just a skilled fighter. She became a symbol. But the Scourge didn't stop. There are A minds learned from every defeat, changing patterns and building stronger ships. They moved deeper into the galaxy, and their next strike was sudden and brutal. Near Ander Prime, a system full of refugee ships waiting to jump, the Scourge launched an ambush. Their ships came from hidden routes, slipping through sensor nets. The humans were caught off guard. The Vanguard, along with two other warships, raced to protect the fleeing civilians. The battle was vicious, with laser fire turning space into a storm of burning metal. Jeria led a defense team on the outer hull of a transport ship, cutting down boarding drones before they could tear into the civilians inside. The fight dragged on for hours, and just as the last transport escaped, a shockwave hit the Vanguard. One of the enemy ships exploded too close. The blast cracked the hull, tossed crew members into space. Jeria was one of them. The force ripped her from the deck, sent her spinning into the black, stars flashing around her like distant fireflies. The crew called for her. Rourke shouted through the comms, but there was no answer. For long minutes, they feared she was gone. The enemy pressed in, sensing weakness. Rourke refused to retreat. His voice cut through panic, ordering the crew to hold the line. Then a strange signal lit up on their screens, incoming vessel, small and fast. It was a Scourge scout ship, badly damaged, but it wasn't moving like an enemy. It was moving like her. The ship docked hard with the Vanguard, and Jeria stepped out, bruised and breathless, but alive. She had fought her way into a drone ship, killed the pilot AI, rewired the controls, and flown it back by herself. Her return broke the fear. The crew roared. Morale surged. With fresh fury, the Vanguard pushed forward, clearing a path for the last civilian ship. Jeria didn't rest. She went straight back to work, blood still on her armor, eyes sharp. Rourke met her outside the medical bay, arms crossed. "You stole a Scourge ship," he said. She nodded, tired but steady. "I borrowed it," she replied. He almost smiled. "You're not just a fighter anymore," he said quietly. "You're something more." Jeria didn't answer. She didn't need to. She had tasted fear and faced death. She had seen what it meant to protect others, to stand when everything seemed lost. Whatever name they gave her now, warrior, hero, symbol, it didn't matter. What mattered was that she had changed. And so had the war. Because now, the Scourge faced something they couldn't understand. Not just technology. Not just tactics. But heart. And in the middle of it stood a once-forgotten princess who had become a fire the machines couldn't put out. Far away on Zalvar Prime, inside the high towers of the royal palace, King Drezek sat in silence watching battle footage on a glowing screen. It showed his daughter, Jeria, fighting beside human soldiers, blades flashing, enemies falling. She was no longer the soft, quiet girl he had once dismissed. She moved with power and purpose, leading missions, saving lives, standing shoulder to shoulder with humans who now trusted her more than any Zalvari ever had. Drezak's face was hard, but his eyes flickered with something that wasn't quite anger or pride. It was confusion. He had thrown her away, and now the galaxy was calling her a hero. His court whispered behind closed doors, unsure how to treat the shame-turned legend. At the same time, Earth Command requested a direct meeting. The Scourge threat was growing fast, and humans needed more help. Drezak agreed to the call, not for alliance but to show strength. Commander Rourke appeared on the large holoscreen, his face calm but firm. Drezak offered to send a few elite warriors to assist the humans in the ongoing battles. But Rourke didn't smile or bow. Instead, he looked the king in the eye and said the truth. "You gave her to us like a broken tool," Rourke said, voice steady. "Now she's part of us. Not because you handed her over, but because she chose who she became." The room went quiet. Even Drezak's advisors froze. Jeria wasn't there to speak, but her silence said more than words. She had become something powerful, not through royal training or palace lessons, but through fire and pain, through learning and surviving. And now the king had to face that truth. He expected Rourke to beg for soldiers. But instead, Jeria herself appeared on the feed. She looked different from when she left, stronger, more confident, her armor marked with battle scars. Her voice was clear. "If Zalvar wants to fight the Scourge," she said, "then don't send warriors as symbols. Send them to bleed beside us." It was not a demand, it was a challenge. For a moment, Drezek said nothing. His pride was wounded, but even he could not ignore what she had become. Slowly, he nodded and agreed. Not because he had to, but because she had earned it. A new alliance was formed that day. Not between thrones or crowns, but between fighters. Zalvari soldiers joined Earth fleets, not above them, but beside them. And leading the way was the warrior their king had once thrown away. Jeria didn't return to her homeworld. She stayed with the humans, where she had built her own place, her own name. And in every battle that followed, when alien and human, ships flew together, when soldiers shouted her name with pride, one truth rang clear across the stars. She was not made by birthright. She was forged by choice. The final wave of the Scourge came like a black storm at the edge of Earth's space, a massive force of over 20,000 AI warships moving without mercy, without fear. The stars themselves seemed to vanish as the enemy fleet arrived, dark shapes filling the sky like a flood of shadows. The Earth Defense Force had only 6 fleets left, damaged, tired, and outnumbered. But now, they had something the Scourge didn't understand. They had unity. They had purpose. They had Jeria. She stood on the deck of the Vanguard, armor locked, blades sharpened, eyes filled with fire. Rourke stood beside her, giving final orders. They knew the only way to win was to go straight into the heart of the enemy formation and destroy the Overmind Core, the main command center that gave orders to the entire Scourge fleet. Without it, the AI would fall into confusion. The mission was close to impossible, but they didn't hesitate. Jeria led the Special Strike Team, a mix of elite humans and Zelvari warriors. They launched from the Vanguard in small, fast ships, dodging heavy fire as the rest of the Allied fleets fought to hold the enemy back. Explosions rocked the sky, ships breaking apart, screams echoing through the comms. Still, they pushed forward, aiming for the massive Overmind vessel, a terrifying black structure that pulsed with blue light and strange patterns. It was not built like a normal ship. It looked alive, like something grown in the darkness. As they landed on its surface, Scourge drones swarmed out to stop them. Jeria charged first, blades spinning, slicing through metal bodies with deadly grace. Her team followed her, fighting through waves of machines, step by bloody step. Inside the ship, the air was cold and strange, filled with a low hum, like the sound of a million whispering voices. They had to fight through narrow halls and rising platforms, dodging traps and sudden attacks. One by one, soldiers fell. Jeria kept going, even as her armor cracked and her muscles screamed. Rourke was hit by a blast that threw him against the wall. She reached him, helped him stand, blood on her face, fire in her eyes. He tried to tell her to go on without him, but she refused. "We finish this together," she said. They reached the core chamber, a glowing orb hanging in the air, guarded by tall machines with razor limbs. The final battle was brutal. Jeria moved like lightning, striking, blocking, leaping. Rourke fired from behind, covering her. The last Guardian fell, crashing into the floor in sparks and smoke. Jeria stood before the core, breathing hard, body shaking. She raised her blades, crossed them, and plunged them deep into the glowing heart. The light exploded, the walls shook, and a long sound echoed like a scream from inside a machine. Outside, the Overmind signal broke. Across the battlefield, Scourge ships froze, stopped firing, lost control. Some drifted into each other. Some shut down completely. The tide had turned. The human and Zelvari fleets swept through the enemy lines, blasting the helpless AI ships apart. Victory was theirs. The Overmind was destroyed. But Jeria collapsed beside the broken core, barely breathing. Rourke pulled her close, holding her as the room fell quiet. Reinforcements arrived minutes later, carrying them out. The war was over, but not without cost. Many had died. Many ships were lost. But the machines were finally stopped. And at the center of it all stood a warrior who had once been cast aside, now shining brighter than any star. The battlefield was silent after the final strike, the stars calm again for the first time in years. Pieces of broken scourge ships floated in space like dead metal birds, their once deadly glow gone. The war was over. The enemy was defeated, and Earth was safe. Inside a recovery ship above the shattered overmined vessel, Jeria lay on a medical bed, her body covered in bruises and deep cuts. Machines worked to heal her, and a quiet hum filled the room. Beside her, Rourke sat with bandages on his chest, watching her closely. She was breathing, but just barely. She had given everything in that final fight. Hours passed before her eyes opened. She blinked slowly, trying to remember where she was. When she saw Rourke, she gave a small smile. "Did we win?" she whispered. Rourke nodded. "You ended it," he said. "You saved us all." Word of her survival spread quickly. The fleet cheered. Across the galaxy, humans and Zelvari celebrated together. Earth's skies were filled with fireworks, and the Zelvari world rang with music and bells. Memorials were built to honor the lost, and the name Jeria was carved in stone at the Filatine, center of everyone. But Jeria didn't ask for honors. When she recovered enough to stand, she went back to the vanguard. She walked through the halls where she had trained, where she had once stumbled and fallen. Soldiers stopped to salute her, but she only nodded, quiet and thoughtful. She was not the same girl who had been handed away by a king. She was not even the same warrior who had led the final charge. She had seen death up close, had held friends as they took their last breath, had carried the weight of entire worlds on her back. A meeting was held at the United Worlds Assembly, where leaders from dozens of planets gathered to discuss peace. Jeria was asked to speak. She stepped onto the platform in simple armor, no crown, no symbols, just herself. She told them the truth, that war had taken much from them, but had also given them a chance to change. That unity had beaten the machines, not just weapons. That belief, trust, and courage had done what empires alone could not. The crowd stood and clapped, their voices echoing like thunder. She did not smile, but her heart was full. After the war, Rourke retired to Earth, choosing a quiet home by a lake, surrounded by trees and peace. Jeria visited often. They would sit in silence, watching the water, remembering those they had lost and those they had saved. She trained young soldiers, now not just in battle but in strength of mind and spirit. The stories of her bravery were told in schools, sung in songs, passed from voice to voice across the stars. She had started as a forgotten gift. Now she was a symbol of hope. She had become the fire that could not be put out, the sword that could not be broken. And as new threats began to rise in the far corners of the galaxy, one message remained clear to all who would challenge humanity again. They had warriors. They had unity. And one of their finest was once an unwanted daughter who became something no one expected, a legend. Years passed after the war, but the name Jeria never faded. Across the stars, people remembered her not as a princess, not even just as a warrior, but as a symbol of what was possible, of how someone forgotten could become unforgettable. The galaxy had changed. The old walls between species began to fall. Human fleets now flew beside Zelvari ships. New training programs taught the values of unity and shared strength. Jeria, once doubted by all, had become the heart of it. She never returned to her father's palace, not even when he sent messages asking her to come home. She had already found her home among the people who fought beside her, among the humans who had given her a chance. She spent her days on different colonies, moving from system to system, teaching young warriors. Her lessons were not just about weapons. She taught them to think, to feel, to understand that strength wasn't only in the body but in the will to protect others. Every student who trained under her learned what it meant to rise, no matter how far they had fallen. Some called her general. Others called her teacher. To many, she was simply hope. Meanwhile, Commander Rourke lived quietly on Earth. He had found peace after years of battle, choosing to live in a house near the sea. Sometimes he would look up at the stars and smile, knowing Jeria was out there, still watching over them. She visited him often, never needing to say much. They would sit by the water, sometimes in silence, sometimes sharing old memories. She had learned something from humans, how to feel deeply, how to carry both pain and joy in the same heart. She never forgot the people who had died in the war. She honored them in her actions and every new warrior she trained. Then one day, a signal came from deep space. A strange ship had crossed into known space, one unlike any seen before. It didn't fire, but its design was dark and sharp, and its energy was unstable. The Alliance Council called for their strongest leaders to meet. Jeria attended, standing tall in her armor, calm but ready. She listened to the reports, studied the scans, and felt something familiar, a feeling she had known before the scourge came. A storm was on the horizon. She didn't flinch. When they asked her if she would lead again, she nodded. Not because she wanted glory, but because she knew what must be done. She sent a message to Rourke. He replied with a short smile. "One more time?" he asked. She nodded. "One more." And so, once again, she stepped into the fire, not as a lost girl, not as a weapon, but as a leader. The galaxy was ready this time, because once, long ago, a king gave away what he thought was weak, and a human saw something worth saving. From that moment on, everything changed. Jeria had become more than a warrior. She had become the fire that lit the path forward. And as the stars shifted and the next threat began to rise, all who stood with her knew one thing for certain: would not face it alone. Not while she still stood. Not while her fire still burned.